Dr. Virginia Sanchez Korrol is Professor Emerita at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. She is the author of several works, including From Colonia to Community, The History of Puerto Ricans in New York City, and Feminists and Abolitionists, The Story of Emilia Casanova. Dr. Sanchez Korrol advises on Puerto Rican and Latina history for museums and the media and writes a blog for the Huffington Post. The Season of Rebels and Roses. This engaging novel for teens follows historical figures that were instrumental in the fight for self-determination in Puerto Rico, addressing issues that remain relevant today: racism, women's rights, and Puerto Rico's status as a colony. The Season of Rebels and Roses also sheds light on women's involvement in their nation's liberation and their own. Virginia Sanchez Korrol.
Yes.
I am so pleased to be able to speak, not interview, chat with you, because I can't put your book down.
That's really very, very heartwarming to hear.
I can't believe it. I started, and then I said, I can't. I have to do something else. Then I went back. Then I'm looking forward to it. And I'm reliving you describe what's going on in history so well. You paint a picture, a clear picture. And that's so difficult to achieve. And for our audience, we're speaking about The Season of Rebels and Roses by Virginia Sanchez Korrol. And as you heard in my presentation, she is a professor emerita at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. And she has many books, but I am so impressed with her work because of the research. All this happens in Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the United States. And I guess she meant it for teens to follow historical figures that were instrumental in the fight for self-determination in Puerto Rico. But I think, Virginia, professor, doctor, that you will reach everybody, everyone, everywhere.
Well, that's also heartwarming to hear. When you start writing a book like this, I was thinking mostly of my students. I was gearing this to them because I knew that nowhere in their high school, students in New York, I'm talking about Latino students, particularly Puerto Rican students in the diaspora, nowhere in their high school education or in their college education would they ever come across this story about their own heritage and something that actually took place here, mostly in New York, in the United States. And this all happened before 1900, when Puerto Rico was still a colony of Spain. So that I thought, well, at least if there's something, maybe not a history book with a greater degree of accuracy that's required, but perhaps if I were to write it as a historical novel, that they would become interested, and that might lead them to ask more questions and do more research, and who knows? Go. There are so many. There are horizons that they had never even thought about.
You've achieved it because the romance, you have all the passions in this book, intrigues and suspicions and danger and forbidden loves, and you have all the elements of a novela. And cinematography, you place us in New York 1892, in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, and you go back and forth with your characters. They move. There's not a dull moment. And you know what? There's a lot of suspense and surprises. You never know what's going to happen down the road. That's the thing.
That's right. That's right. One of the hardest. Well, I'll tell you, one of the hardest things to do in putting this book together was I knew that I couldn't do it as a history book because I just don't have the facility to be traveling the way I used to when I was more active and teaching and involved with more writing for a historical audience. So I knew I didn't, and I also felt, well, I don't really want to do history because, not a lot of people like history.
They think it's boring. They lose
They think it's boring. I remember as a kid growing up in the South Bronx that I was intrigued by historical novels, and then I grew up to go into that profession because of the novels. Not because of the histories that I read, but because of the novels that told me something about a history that I wanted to know about. And then going back to my point, one of the hardest things for me to do with this book was to tell the story from the perspective of the women.
Yes.
Because that's not really known.
You have to stress also with Lola Rodriguez et al. She's known in, I think, in all Latin America.
All Latin
America.
And she's
loved and honored and venerated in Cuba and Puerto Rico.
All over.
Because she says, what is it? Las alas?
No, so Cuba and Puerto Rico son de un pájaro las dos alas.
Las dos alas.
Yeah.
They receive bullets and loves in one same heart.
Right.
And that is so beautiful. And also she wrote El Himno de la Borinqueña. The anthem.
Yeah, the Puerto Rican anthem, not with her words, but the Puerto Rican anthem. Despierta Borinquen, it's time to fight.
Oh my
God!
God!
Time to. It's. She was an incredible woman, and of course we have people have written about her all the time, but here in this book, she really is not the major focus. The major focus is Inocencia Martinez, Santa Ella, who marries Sotero Figueroa, who becomes the editor of the revolutionary newspaper Patria, and they live in New York during those 10 years. That's what I call the season. During those 10 years of rebellion against Spanish colonial authority. And I kept thinking, well, okay, how did they live? Where did they live? Why New York? What did they feel about New York? And how was it to live here during that time? What did they do? So I did a lot of newspaper reading. I read a lot of Patria. I read any anecdotal material I could get my hands on to get an idea of where they are. And of course, finding out where they lived, well, that comes out in their correspondence.
It's like a picture. You're painting a picture, a realistic picture. I said, how many hours did Virginia Sanchez Korrol invest in this book? How many years? How were you able to track these people in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Havana, in 1890, 92, or whatever? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, sometimes I did spend hours, days, sometimes weeks, searching out one little bit of information. So, for example, one of the minor characters, but he really is very important, is Julio Jose Hena. He's a doctor at Bellevue Hospital, and Puerto Rican, graduate of Columbia University Medical School in 1872, somewhere around there. And he becomes the head of the Puerto Rico section of the Cuban Revolutionary Party. Now, I had to find out what doctors did at that point in time.
Oh gosh!
I found his card. I did a lot of research online on the graduates of Columbia University during that time. At that point in time, doctors had to write a dissertation the way professors have to do today. And the dissertation that he wrote on was on the effects of malaria, the effects of tropical diseases, which was interesting, of course, because he comes from Puerto Rico. He would be interested in that. And then they had to apprentice themselves to another doctor, and usually in Europe, because American medical schools were really not as important as the European schools. Well, searching and searching online, I finally found his address, and and that's where he kept his office. And I looked at the card, and actually I have this in the book, and I realized that the amount of time that he spent in private practice was only 2 days a week and a few hours at that. Why was that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, in those days, doctors became mentors and teachers and instructors in the medical schools. So most of their time was going to be spent seeing patients at the hospital, instructing medical school students, making house calls, and one day, after I get all this information, I go, well, what did the office look like? I knew his office was near Fifth Avenue. He was very wealthy on West 40th Street near Fifth Avenue. And what would a doctor have in his home office at that point in time? Well, that meant going back and looking at a lot of pictures and doing some more reading about it in order to, I guess it's like filmmaking, when you're making you have to so many shots in order to get the 1 second or the 1 minute that you really are going to use. So that's what I had to do with Dr. Henna. The type of clothing that women used, there's a section in the book when Inocencia goes to visit Doña Emilia Casanova de Villaverde, who's the character in my first novel, a Cuban woman who is also involved with this movement for independence. And Doña Emilia remarks that Inocencia doesn't wear a corset.
I read that.
Well, in order to get to that point where she doesn't wear a corset, I had to do a great deal of research on women's outfits during that time, where they shopped, what did the outfits look like. All women wore corsets. A woman who didn't wear a corset was considered a loose woman. She. And there were many women who believed in the value of the corsets because they actually it strengthened the body and it shaped the body. Well, Inocencia is not wearing a corset because she's pregnant.
That's right.
At this point in time.
But then the men, you describe what they wear and their hats and it's amazing. You really put it together with details. And that's so important because, it makes people see it in their mind. They're creating with you. They become co-creators. I've
been accused of too many details. But in this book, I felt it was really important.
It was necessary.
Yeah. I was thinking also about the hardest thing in the book was to tell this story from the point of view of the women. I knew they created clubs. That was very, very important for the movement because those clubs did fundraising, and they with the funds that they raised, they bought ammunition, or they helped to outfit a contraband to take into Cuba because the fighting was actually going on in Cuba, and it hadn't yet started in Puerto Rico. And the idea of the story is, when is it going to start in Puerto Rico? How do we prepare for that? So to tell the story from just their clubs isn't enough. They had these clubs, but they weren't allowed to attend the meetings that the men had. They weren't allowed to sign their almost, you could call it a Declaration of Independence when they create the Puerto Rico section. Women are not there. There are 59 men there. Women are not allowed at these meetings. So how do you tell the story from their point of view? And when I got up to the end, which is the critical part of what actually happens with the movement, being a historian, I was prepared to go ahead and put in all the history of what happened. And I said, wait a minute, hold it a minute. I can't talk about what the men were saying and feeling. This is not their story. That's so I had to go back and think. Well, how did the women feel? What were they doing? How were they disappointed? Well, for someone like Doña Lola Rodriguez de Tio, she had been fighting this war for 30 years. This was her life. And she had to be crushed. She had to be devastated. And
not only that, Virginia, when you describe that they're in exile, they live in fear. They are watched. They're persecuted. They have to readjust from one nation to the other. How do these people travel? What do they take with them? I mean, it's so complex.
Right. And that was, to me, that was easier than trying to figure out what they were doing in Puerto Rico, because my experience is a New York experience, and trying to putting together and doing the research on what life was like for the upper class, the middle class in Puerto Rico at this time was that took a bit of doing, and I kept telling myself, well, I only have to do this in the beginning. I don't have to continue it from this point on. But then, as it turned out, I had to follow Lola to Cuba and talk about her meetings and her salons, which was the other thing that women did. They held these literary salons, but they were constantly being watched. They lived
in fear. They lived in fear.
Yeah.
Now, listen, you know what impressed me? When Martí showed up, Jose Martí.
Yeah.
In the meeting in New York.
Right.
And Sotero Figueroa. I mean, I got into it. I'm into it. You caught me and you got me into it.
Yeah, that was hard. That was hard.
That was a hard part, I believe.
Because how do you deal with with a leader, with
oh my God,
everybody knows about, and I thought, well, and again, he's larger than life. He's wrapped in the flags. Everybody knows his story. I mean, the hero of the revolution.
Well, not everybody. I think you've really got you're going to get a lot of new people interested in this unity between Puerto Rico and Cuba.
Yes, that existed. One of the reviewers called it a Pan-Antillean unity. Yes. People who have written reviews are surprised at that, because they don't realize that before the United States took over Puerto Rico in 1898, that Cuba, these countries were part of Spain. They were part of the Marine Empire, and the people had family all over the Caribbean. Yes. Lola Rodriguez de Tio has a grandmother who's Dominican, has another one who's Cuban. She's exiled
Venezuela, also in Venezuela. Also. Yes. There
are these family connections throughout that people don't realize were so important. But what I like about Martí, and I kind of snuck it in, but is that he is having this lovely affair with.
Yes, you speak about his romance.
Carmen Millares, who is a married woman, and he's a married man.
No one ever says anything about that, Virginia. You're a daredevil. No one mentions that in any of the books.
It's kind of mentioned, but but here's the thing that I always find fascinating. You're going to love this because you're a theater person. He was married in Cuba. He had a son. He was married to a woman named Carmen also. He comes to New York in 1880, and he goes to live in the boarding house of Carmen Millares Mantilla. Her father was Puerto Rican, which I think her mother was Cuban. Her father was Puerto Rican. And she's married with children, but her husband is very, very ill. Now, nobody knows what happens. There's a lot of speculation about whether the child whose picture he carries next to his heart is his daughter. I don't say it is his daughter. I just say this is the woman whose child this picture is.
Yes.
And I kind of go around it like that. But in later years, that child, whose name was Maria, marries and has a son, and the son is Cesar Romero.
Really? The actor?
Yes.
The actor?
The actor. He said that his mother, on her dying bed, now, I don't know. Nobody's doing DNA study on this, but that his mother, on her dying bed, confessed to him that he was the son of Jose Martin. I don't know.
Oh, my gosh. That's another story. Oh, my goodness. You see, there's so
lot
many
of looking
branches
at the physical appearance of the daughter and Marti, and unfortunately, we don't. It's going to make a great story someday.
No, you have so much. That's why I'm saying, listen, cinematography. You have to. These women are exciting, passionate, different. They are daring. They go after what they want.
Yeah,
these are the heroes of today. This is what girls want to look up to, Virginia.
That's why. That's another reason why I stuck to the women, because the chapters about the princess and the rebel. The rebel is Evangelina Cosillo y Cisneros, a young 18-year-old who is rescued in a daring event by a newspaper guy, so that they could sell newspapers. And he actually goes down to Cuba. There are books and stories. This is for real. There are books written about it. People knew about it. It was on the front pages of the journal. It was an incredible story. And he brings her to New York. And the scene in New York comes straight out of the New York Times.
That is
and
fantastic.
The princess, the Hawaiian princess. This is stuff that you kind of know if you're if you're a historian. You kind of, I'm interested in all of these connections. How you can bring them all in one place. You can't really do it in a history book.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to you, and you still question yourself. You I guess you still question: did I do this right? Did I do that right? You know what? Time will tell, and you have a hit on your hands, darling.
Oh, that.
I'm telling you.
Well,
listen, Virginia, if you can reach one person, if you can reach one student, you've achieved your goal.
Well, I hope people find it. I hope students find it.
Where is it available? By the way, tell me, how can they reach it?
The publisher is Arte Público Press. They are in Houston. They are the largest publisher of Latino and bilingual books in the nation. And they also outsource to all the major bookstores. So Amazon has it, both in Kindle and in paperback, and Barnes and Noble has it, and they have it on the Nook also. So there's a lot of ways to get to the book. that's not going to be difficult. It's just a question of finding it. And right now I'm doing some. I'll be doing some talks about it. October the 11th, from 6 to 8 in the evening. I'll be giving.
I'll be there.
About it. Oh, great! On at Centro, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College.
Well, listen, Virginia Sanchez Korrol, God bless you. And the book is The Season of Rebels and Roses. You must look for it. Amazon is the best choice now because it's so handy. But it's going to be in all the bookstores, and it could be gotten also by the Arte Público Press in Houston. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.